series brought to you by Executive Education, Dayanand Sagar University. We, of course, bring the finest minds from across the world to our classrooms. Dr. Sreenivasa Gorti is a technology leader with an established track record of leading innovation and product development. Gorti is currently the Vice President of Product Management at a leading industrial AI company, SparkCognition. In this role, he is responsible for products, strategy, and execution of AI-based products to help industrial companies transition to the artificial intelligence era. Prior to his current position, Gorti had a long career at AT&T in various technological roles and played key roles in driving strategies around big data, advertising, application ecosystems, and corporate-wide innovation programs. Gorti's career path over the past 25 years has taken him through a variety of roles, which include software developer, architect, technology strategist, manager, entrepreneur, and executive in different domains, which include, again, automation, automotive, oil and gas, mobile networks, television, advertising, and enterprise software. He is indeed a versatile man. Through these roles, he has maintained active expertise and interest in AI-based innovation, distributed systems, and data-driven insights to drive key business decisions. Sreenivasa Gorti has a bachelor's in civil engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, an MS from Johns Hopkins University in the United States, and a PhD from the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge, United States. He has several academic publications and over 50 granted patents. Dr. Sreenivasa will talk about artificial intelligence and digital transformation in the present industrial scenario. We are indeed honored and privileged to have him here today. Thank you very much, Dr. Sreenivasa. Over to you now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to have me here. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to such a large audience. So what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about three topics that have been on my mind recently. Some of them have been on my mind for a very long time. But what does it mean to be a digital native business? What's involved in taking a so-called legacy business and evolving them to the digital world? How is AI involved in this transformation, and how will that role evolve? And what does this pandemic mean for all of us? Now, these are all individually transformative sort of forces, and they've somehow managed to come together, and they're going to impact all of us. They're going to impact the world, the country, my company, myself, probably my children. And I think what I wanted to do today is to sort of raise a variety of topics that each of you should spend a fair amount of time thinking about over the next few months. Now, I will share with you my perspective. As Captain Subbarao mentioned, I've had a rather meandering career, and it's gone through a variety of domains, a variety of roles. But the one thing that has stayed constant is my passion for data-driven insights and artificial intelligence. And so when I share with you my perspective, I'm not claiming to be prescient, but rather really hoping to get you thinking about what kinds of changes are coming and what role you want to play to be part of that change. Okay, so let's go to what not moving. Hang on a second. Oh, there you go. Okay. So by now, most of you, if you've been reading, any sort of technical business press, have seen some variant of this slide. There are many, many variants, right? And what it's really saying is that we're in a world where data is coming from all over the place. Through our daily activities as consumers, when you search for something, you buy something, you like something, you share something, you tweet something, this data is all being constantly collected. And it's an explosion of data collection that has been boosted by technology trends that allow us to store and manage this data. Now, some companies do a better job of actually extracting value from this data, and we call them digital native companies. So obviously, Google, Amazon, Facebook, these are all companies that are digital natives, and their sort of fundamental competitive advantage is the ability to understand all the data they collect and either form business models based around that data or being able to improve their product and services and so on. For industrial companies, we're seeing a similar sort of trend. They are also collecting a lot of data. That data is coming from in a variety of forms. One is that they have a bunch of enterprise systems related to inventory, sales, CRM, et cetera. And most of this data is in databases and collected in formal approaches, and it's what you'd call structured data, right? It has a relatively clear structure to it. There's also data coming from their people, and that data is coming mostly in the form of very loose natural language that's entered in a variety of systems, work order systems, maintenance systems, comments that they enter in a variety of enterprise systems, and so on, what we call natural language. And the more advanced companies are using that data as well to try and understand what's going on with respect to a process, a machine, even the employees themselves. So for example, I was recently involved in a study where, a large financial firm was looking at emails that their traders were exchanging to identify early signs of burnout, right? And try to prevent or head that burnout off. And these are really interesting types of applications, and the whole industrial revolution or the digital revolution is really driven by what sorts of data do you have that you can identify interesting insights from, and can you form a business model around that. So the other major component for industrial companies is machines. Machines, well-instrumented machines. For example, we deal with combustion turbines, and a combustion turbine might have 3,000 sensors that are emitting data pretty much every second. And so you are talking about a very large amount of data. Now, clearly, humans are not, our brains don't function in a way that we can process very large amounts of data that quickly. So you have to have much more structured ways of analyzing it, and that's what this whole AI revolution is about. It's all about learning from data what people do not know. So clearly, data is only as valuable as the decisions it drives. So at a very high level, we can look at these decisions as descriptive, which is, what actually happened, and that's really analytics. Or you can talk about diagnostic. Why did something happen? What will happen in the future? What should I do about it? And these are all at varying stages of requiring human input. At the end of the day, what you want to do is, and in a business, is to really get from data to making some decisions that's driving some concrete actions to improve that workflow. So let's look at digital revolution, digital transformation, and what that means. Now, one of the things that I did was to start asking the question of how do you frame digital transformation. So this particular slide is something that comes directly out of a conversation that I had with a senior leader in a telco. And really their vision was to identify what high-level business workflows changes would they be able to drive if AI and data would give them all the insights they need. So this is just a pretty typical way of framing the digital transformation vision. And digital transformation in this context is defined as essentially changing every portion of the business by driving insights from data. So if we were to look at how do I build the product? How do I market the product? How do I identify what product to build? How do I test market acceptance of the product? How do I service the product, right? And that's just with respect to an external product or service that you offer to the market. And many of the companies that I talk to, what I would call the industrial companies, are primarily dealing with physical goods and physical goods. So when we look at digital transformation in this context, it's about trying to analyze operationally every part of their business and say, our people have got us here. So any Fortune 500 company has obviously succeeded because the collective expertise of their people have made their business model work, right? Now, if you want to look at what additional insights can all this new AI and data-enabled systems give us? How do we continuously improve and drive towards operational excellence? How do we get customer experience and insights that are delightful is the word that this particular executive used. And so the challenge here is that this is a really hard problem. And the reason it's hard is because digital transformation is fundamentally tied up with innovation. It involves asking the question of what data sets do we have? What insights can we get from those data sets? Testing hypotheses on those insights, and then trying to make sure that any insights that you get can actually be used in an operational workflow to drive the changes that you're looking. So in order to succeed here, it requires a lot of what I would call soft values being driven at the leadership level. So it's not just about the technology, which in itself is fairly complex, both from the data infrastructure that you need, as well as from the AI technique, right? But it needs leadership commitment to say, what are my high value opportunities? How am I going to identify them? Am I going to be able to accept the fact that I'm going to have to experiment and things are going to fail, and yet I'm committed to this vision of using data to drive changes in my business, right? How do I do this quickly? And you know, obviously, some of these projects, they start, they take on a life of their own, and they go on sort of indefinitely. And then at some point, support within the organization starts to die down because senior executives start questioning what is the value that we're seeing out of all the spend that we've incurred. And so you need to really get efficient about how to do this loop of hypothesis, collect the data, try to derive the insights, try to get to an operational workflow, and do that in a quick, agile loop. For those of you who are in the software world, you've heard about agile, but agile is now a very popular term in the context of business as well, as many of you probably also know. So there's a culture and the mindset transformation to become data-driven. Now, one of the fundamental things that you encounter when you take, projects, when you take on projects like this, is executives got to senior executive levels, and they typically have a fair amount of what I would very bluntly categorize as hubris, right? The hubris being driven by, I know what I'm doing, I'm an expert, I know how to make these decisions. But the higher up you go, obviously, the less information you're able to really synthesize into the decision that you're making. So there's a fair amount of gut and intuition that's involved. And the good leaders do that really well, right? But it also happens at a subject matter expert level. If I'm an engineer who's sitting on, looking at a platform, a remote monitoring platform, and my AI system is telling me that I'm going to encounter a failure, as an expert, this is something that I didn't know, and the system is telling me, and I need to have confidence to make that decision. And you find a lot of experts are still in this industrial world skeptical about the ability of an AI system to be able to share insights that they didn't already. So there's an ongoing transformation that's happening in the culture and the mind. Capabilities and partner collaboration models are important because this is really a hard set of infrastructure to piece together. And so there's a lot of work that's needed to make this right. And then the last piece of it is incorporating data into key business workflows. At the end of the day, all of these only work if a human in the loop is able to process these AI insights into a form that makes sense. Now, I'll give you an example of AI in an autonomous vehicle, right? So if you ever been in any of the cars with auto driving, you find that there is a lot of stutter starts that happen because the AI thinks that it's encountered some obstacle, but the human knows that, well, okay, I could have driven around it. So there's a lot of false positive kinds of issues that happen, and these are the kinds of things that you have to work around when you're incorporating them into real workflows. Okay, so that was a mouthful. Let me talk about AI. And this is not really meant to be a treatise on or tutorial on artificial intelligence techniques, right? So let me step up really high level and talk about the quest for artificial intelligence. Now, I myself have been in this world for 25 years looking at artificial intelligence in various forms. Back when we were in grad school, Rahul and I, we talked about artificial intelligence all the time, and it had a completely different form than what it is now, right now. And the main thing that's changed is the fact of all that data. Because there's a lot of data, because our ability to process that data has become substantially improved, there's a class of artificial intelligence techniques focused on machine learning, which is the idea that you learn from data. That is now the predominant form of machine learning, of artificial intelligence. But there are other techniques that have been around for a long time. The overall quest for artificial intelligence is to really try and figure out, can we ever get to, like a data from Star Trek, right? Somebody who's a man-machine, not quite a man, a robot that is fully intelligent in the human sense. And that involves 5 steps. Perception, which is recognizing patterns. Cognition, which is understanding those patterns. Action, which is the ability to do something about what you've understood. Agency, which is about deciding, what should I do? And sentience, which is sort of the ultimate human experience. So let's make that more concrete. And I'll give you a very simple-minded sort of an explanation. Let's say you looked at this picture. You said, it's a line. Doesn't take you any time to do it. And we can probably take a 2-year-old and train the 2-year-old in about 10 minutes by showing them 10 pictures of lines, and they will instantly be able to recognize a line and why it's different from, a dog, let's say, right? Just so happens that a deep learning system requires a hell of a lot more images. It requires, off the orders of 10, 20, 50,000 images before it's able to actually recognize that. But you did it very fast, right? Perception has played a very important role in speech, and has played an important role in vision. And a lot of the recent advances that are touted in deep learning are really because they really were a quantum jump over existing approaches to in speech and vision. And so perception is an area where deep learning has actually done quite well. Cognition is the next step. Now, you saw this line. It's behind a cage, and you understood the context of this line, and you realized that, okay, it's behind a cage, and you process that understanding. The next step is action. Now, let's say that this line was not behind a cage, but you were on a safari or something, and you saw this line. This guy is licking his lips, is looking at you like you might be really tasty. And so, that is now getting you to think about, okay, what should I do? And you've got some action that you're willing to take about it. Now, again, this is an area where, given very targeted set of actions, AI techniques like reinforcement learning are actually doing quite well. And they've learned to do things like making decisions about what moves to play next in games of chess or Go and things like that. So action is about, given a context, how do I decide, what should I do next? Or what should I do next? Agency gets back to the choice of, why did I decide to go on a safari instead of deciding to go watch the lion at a zoo? And agency is what we think of as free will. And at this point, AI systems don't really have agency, right? And it's a real challenge in terms of thinking about AI systems that have agency, because do you really want them to set goals for themselves? And it's an active area of research, but very, very quickly it starts getting into the philosophical tie of what does AI mean? And, at the end of the day, you're getting to sentience. And sentience is the uniquely human experience. you might be sitting on that and wondering when that lion is looking at you, why am I here? It's because you wanted to experience the safari. Or you might have a broader question, why am I even here on this planet, right? Which is a uniquely human sort of a question. And so, this is very, very broad and philosophical. And at the end of the day, when you do a lot of research on AI, it necessarily enters into questions like that. So I gave all this really as a context setting for how AI is developing and where we are. At this point, I would say that perception is, AI does quite well, and action AI it's currently being looked at in the context of autonomous vehicles and robots and things like that, but it's still relatively immature. We've got a long way to go, and we are a very long way from being near agency or sentient. So let's take this and tie it back to something very, very pragmatic, right? Which is, let's bring it back to a practical industrial setting. And I've been involved in discussions with companies at different stages of this advanced analytics journey, you might call it. The very first step is awareness. And there's a lot of hype around AI, primarily because as a human, it's one of those areas where it's really easy for us to envision what an AI system should do. And this is different for AI than for other things like, for example, quantum computing, where, I honestly don't have any idea whatsoever what a quantum computing system should do, could do, or does. Whereas because we're human, we can understand what an AI system is supposed to do, and when it does something stupid, we are very quick to point it out, et cetera, et cetera. But AI, has got a lot of hype because some of the most valuable tech companies have successfully managed to use it. And so every company that I talk to wants AI and thinks that the way to do it is by starting to hire a lot of data science. And so that takes us to the next step, the active stage, where you have a fair amount of experimentation. And in the data science context, that experimentation means that, you are hiring a group of data scientists, you're throwing a bunch of data at them, and you're starting to understand whether you can get insights from that data. All well and good. So you've invested heavily in data infrastructure, which is the data accessibility piece at the bottom of this chart here. You've got the technical skills, and you've got a bunch of in-house talent that you've hired. And this is kind of where we are. As an industry, most of the industrial companies that I talk to are at this stage. What does it mean to get here? The operational state. This is where things start to get really challenging, because now you're talking about not just experimenting with data sets and experimenting with data science models, but you're actually talking about how to operationalize them into workflows that deliver tangible value to a business. And some companies have started taking that step. So I'm actively involved with several of my customers in really helping them to make the transition from here to here, in actually deriving commercial value from operational systems. Some companies are further ahead. And when you start thinking about digital native companies, the use of AI is systemic. It's pervasive across their digital processes, across their business models, and it's a fundamental part of who they are. That's why we call them digital natives. So they have actually mastered the operationalization and the scalability piece. And then finally, you get to transformation. And transformation is where you get to an adaptive capability very similar to a human. You can sort of reinvent yourself as a business every couple of years or every few years based on unexpected events, the pandemic being a pretty spectacular example of an unexpected event. So this is sort of the advanced analytics journey that I have been involved in, and I think many of the industrial companies will go through. And why is this problem so important? And this problem is really important for industrial companies in particular because they account for $1 trillion annually of operational losses. And these operational losses are just what you'd call wasted effort. And it might show up in different forms, might show up in just the maintenance costs compared to the top performers. And this is a study that looked at the top quartile of performers versus the remaining three quartile of companies. And they concluded that top performers spend 50% less on maintenance, which adds 15 days of production. So, for example, on an offshore platform that produces 100,000 barrels of oil a day at, now I guess $20 per barrel, you can very quickly look at what 15 days of production means in terms of operational value, right? Similarly, safety. The top performers had 1/3 the number of safety incidents because they were able to anticipate safety issues much earlier. And emissions. So industrial companies as a whole have been on this journey. There's a lot of interest across the globe. So our company really looks not just in the US, but we've been in Latin America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in the Far East, etc. And across the board, there is interest. But, it's still the start of this journey. COVID-19 happened when none of us were expecting any, right? And here's some things that I have personally observed. What we're starting to see, based on everything we read, is that there are clearly different impacts on digital haves versus digital have. And Captain Nagaraj was asking me earlier on about what the impact in Austin was. Well, Austin is full of a bunch of digital haves, right? So many people are able to work from home, and the people who are suffering are essentially the restaurants, the retail shops, etc. There are a lot of people whose work involves the physical world. They cannot do conference calls by Zoom. They cannot just, produce knowledge work. And so there's a very clear impact on this. And that's at the macro level as well. You look at companies like Amazon, they're thriving. Companies like Microsoft, they are thriving in this, it hasn't impacted their business. Many of my customers are starting to see pretty significant impacts because of COVID. The second piece is that global interconnectedness assumptions are being tested. There's an increasing amount of talk of isolationism and, people talking about self-reliance and the supply chains being so interconnected is something that's being examined. And so a lot of these assumptions are being tested, and I suspect that they will have an impact going forward. There are systemic challenges to a variety of societal, economic, and policy assumptions. And we're going to start seeing debates playing out in the public world on many of them. Risk appetites are being tested. We talked about, are you willing to go out? Are you willing to go out and meet your friends? Are you willing to personally go out and do any shopping? What happens if not enough people shop? What happens if not enough people buy cars? What happens if not enough people drive? And so on. And so I think in the U.S., it's happening at a state-by-state level just because of the way our government is set up. And these experiments on risk appetites are being tested at what I'd say are local levels. And then the last part is data-driven social interaction. What does it mean that if are you willing to go have dinner with your friends? Are you, do you know what kind of risk they take? Are you risking exposure to yourself, to your family? When you go to a retail store, are you willing to have your temperature taken before you walk in? Are shops going to serve people who have a COVID-free certificate any different than customers who don't? These are the kinds of questions that are really, we don't know the answers to. So what to expect post-COVID? I will not claim to be an expert. My speculation is as good as anyone else. I follow news. I get articles every day from McKinsey and from The Economist, and in my mail there's a variety of predictions that are happening pretty much every day. So the left side of the slide is showing you a quote that I thought actually does a pretty good job of capturing what post-COVID might be. And it's fundamentally the fact that it's a catalyst for change that we have not seen in a long time. And the scale of the change and the speed at which it's happening means that we really have to look at, every company will have to really re-examine their business model, re-examine their entire way of working. And digital is where things will go. So I'm I think that's probably about captures. And of course, you can start parsing what that means at a much finer grain level, but that's pretty much what I think we should expect. I did read an article recently about something that Jeff Bezos said a long time back, and this stuck in my head. And what he said was, look, when you're doing a long-term strategy, I would rather do it on thinking about what will not change. What will not change is that customer expectations for better quality, better experiences, lower cost will not change. So your digital transformation, your AI experiences all have to lead towards that. You know that there's a need for companies and individuals to adapt to change, and that is a constant need. And so you're going to have to set up yourself individually and your company to be able to account for that. What will not change is that AI is continuing to evolve at an interesting rate, and it will continue to present a variety of societal and ethical questions. Questions about simple things like data privacy that's discussed at end, things like bias in models, and whether models developed by a certain group of people are going to capture their bias. Fear of automation. What does automation mean for the variety of jobs? What kinds of jobs are at risk, and what kinds of jobs will survive going forward? Widening wealth gaps. And this, I think there is no way out of it. I mean, these are all going to be issues. And if we eventually get to a sentient AI, what Ray Kurzweil calls the singularity moment, where man and machine become one, well, okay, maybe all these problems don't matter anymore. I personally am much more sanguine about humans being able to control the development of AI and not this thing that we've let out of a bottle that will, eventually just take over. But we know that these changes are coming. So the message I'll leave you with is engage in the change. Those of you who are starting your careers, who understand that these kinds of changes will come, make it your goal to understand what it means. What do these trends even mean? What will not change? And what are the things that you want to cause in terms of personal change to your company? Maybe you do a startup and you decide to cause some change to society or to some market, or maybe you join a company and you're part of the change. Engage in the change. So I think my half an hour is up, Rahul, and I'm going to stop right here.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Discussion.
So, very interesting thoughts, and some, obviously, quite a few of those we were not privy to, we have not heard or seen before. So there are quite a few interesting questions, and I have some. So, at a broad level, I mean, say 20 years back, 30 years back, AI being talked about, like you said, it being sort of the thing in the air. And maybe there was let down, and there wasn't actually the promise being lived up to, right? So there were
I'm sorry, Rahul, you're really cutting out and I couldn't hear you very well.
Rahul, I think your audio is having a few issues. Can I sort of engage with Dr. Sreenivasa on your behalf?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think we are having some issues at your end. So, Dr. Gorti, I'll start off from Professor Naveen Sriram. He says AI could bring vast benefits to society, but the menace could be just as vast. In terms of menace, I assume he's talking about job losses and so on and so forth. And this is, of course, a question that is foremost in everybody's mind, and it's fairly routine. Do you think really AI is going to devastate the workplace in terms of job losses?
So I think devastate might be overstating it a little bit. Will it cause change in the market and the kinds of skills needed? Absolutely. Right. And so let's parse that. The reason I positioned the quest for artificial intelligence in terms of the 5 steps that I did: perception, cognition, action, etc. Right, and was to show you that there are certain tasks, basic pattern recognition types of tasks, that AI does a really good job at, right? So if your job is primarily to look at data and identify patterns and come up with some diagnosis of things. So for example, diagnosis-oriented tasks are probably going to be something that AI will excel pretty well at. So I'll give you an example of a radiologist who's looking at, in his or her lifetime has looked at, let's say, 10,000 X-rays, whereas an AI machine is trained on 1 million X-rays, right? So its ability to find very subtle patterns in very large amounts of data very quickly will replace certain types of jobs, right? What do you do after that? What is the right course of action, the decision to make? There's entirely too much subjectivity in synthesizing large amounts of information that you need to get to some course of action. And those kinds of jobs will continue to remain. Synthesis of very large amounts of information in an effort to form a perspective and drive a bias towards some action is, again, going to be something that's much more human-oriented. And I think those kinds of jobs will definitely survive. The jobs that we're talking about, in the industrial sector, many of the companies that I talk to, their biggest problem is they're not able to attract talent, the younger talent, and a lot of their older subject matter experts are about to retire. And so there's this vast amount of knowledge that's locked up in that they're trying to use AI to sort of harness and then use to transfer. So some of those jobs might disappear. So I think the long and short is, I wouldn't think of it as a menace. And you actually said that the benefits could bring vast benefits and the menace could be just as vast. So it is actually that sort of a trade-off. And I think you have to really look at it in terms of, what type of jobs you're talking about.
Yeah, great. So I think that is what most people believe. So for example, in your part of the world, I understand they're doing some cutting edge work on integrating medical help and artificial intelligence, where you take medical help to remote areas. So the University of Texas apparently is doing a lot of work there. And so that brings home the point that AI could have enormous benefits for humankind as we go forward. So Ajay Marshall, one of my students, he says, what are your opinions on AI in governance? So I assume he's talking about organization governance in terms of how organizations are governed, but he says, can AI be used in that area? And any thoughts?
So, personally, I have a bias towards AI augmenting human decisions, right? And that, I mean, it's the community at large is pretty divided. So, for example, in my own company, there are people who think AI could actually replace the human. So, for pretty much any type of task, right? In governance, I think when you're talking about governance in the context of companies, in terms of like managing the companies and things like that,
yes.
or ensuring that governance in the sense of boundaries and guiding actions to fall within regulatory policies, ethical policies, things like that. I think that the latter is probably what you're talking about.
Yes.
So yeah, that is a hard question. I haven't seen a lot of work on AI in the governance space. A lot of what we call governance in the industrial sector is around data governance. So and it's really to make sure that there are policies relative to how data is leaking out of the enterprise, et cetera. I know that there's a lot of regulatory AI that's looking at regulatory issues and ethical issues, but I have not personally been involved in any of that. So nothing really insightful to offer there.
Yeah, right. So again, things like face recognition, software, and where they're talking about bringing it in to countries like India too, where you could have cameras taking pictures and then scanning them across a database and then coming up with face recognition and so on and so forth. So there are issues and people are concerned about lack of privacy and so on. This is an ongoing debate, I think, between what they call quote unquote as national security and people's privacy. And so that is a debate, I think, that will keep going on. So
yeah, that will certainly continue. So I've been certainly involved in a lot of data privacy and even personal privacy issues, right? The question is when somebody takes a, there's been some interesting work done in giving you personal control of the data that's being collected about you, right? Which is that, so there, for example, the data that's collected about you is something that you have a token to, and you can go in periodically and review what data has been collected. But of course, these are highly distributed systems. And most of the examples I've seen are data collected within specific contexts and allow you to look at that data and determine how it can be used or won't be used. What I feel is that, we've already started making very direct consumer choices in giving up privacy. So I think data privacy will continue to be an issue, but when presented the choice, consumers always seem to be opting for convenience, right, and security, as opposed to the privacy. Now, obviously, the big issue there is at what point does that cross over some sort of a tipping point where you start to, see abuse of that data by those who've collected it. And we're already seeing it to a certain extent. Facebook gets into a lot of trouble, because of the kind of targeted advertising that they're doing, et cetera. So I think that debate will continue, and it's important to continue to be engaged in that debate. And I think what we'll start to see is much more highly distributed systems of determining what control or what data people are allowed access to, blockchain-based systems, for example, which is going to be even pretty important for things like when, for example, machines are talking to each other. Our company does work on autonomous drones, and you're looking at how does one drone trust another one that's flying in the air? There's no system of rules, and so you're looking at blockchain-based trust mechanisms and so on.
Fantastic. That was very insightful. How does one drone trust another drone?
Yeah,
great. So,
so we've got go ahead.
Yeah. So we have got a question from Dr. Rahul Dige, and like a true engineer, he has sort of wandered into the area of behavioral psychology. And he says that how do soft skills, we all understand today that soft skills are very important for managers. But he says in the domain of AI and probably robots and so on and so forth, how does this pan out? How do managers bring in soft skills? Because there's going to be a new paradigm where they're probably working with AI, humans, robots, and so on and so on. Drones, you mentioned. So is there going to be a change in behavioral psychology and so on? I suspect it's a little unfair question, but then take a shot at it.
So soft skills definitely matter. So just to give you an example, so data scientists, I was on a call a couple of days ago, and we had 15 people on the call. 10 of them were data scientists. All 15 were data scientists. 10 of them were PhDs, and the language is very arcane in the world of mathematics. And it takes them no time at all to get completely divorced from the context of the problem that they were trying to solve. So soft skills are, as a manager, are important to A, make sure that they're working on the right problem, B, to understand what they're talking about and make sure that they're maintaining the connection to the original problem, and C, translating whatever they've come up with to the rest of the world. So I think one could make a very lucrative career just doing that, right? But going further in terms of psychology and what does an AI system really mean, I think you start to get into the world of fairly deep philosophical questions, right? Which is at a basic pattern matching level, AI has been very successful, but human actions, there's a lot of subjectivity in terms of how you decide to take action in the context of some evidence. And a lot of that is based on, based on gut, based on context, based on anticipation of what might happen. And piecing all of that together is still not something that AI systems do very well, except in relatively limited context.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I will try to ask a related question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So related to the extension of the soft skills question is for managers, what portion or are there parts of AI as skills people should pick up and should know in terms of being effective managers? So when we talk about AI or we attend talks on AI and specifics of it, usually we sort of hear about what applications people are building using AI, etc. But to be current, and you mentioned rightly that we must embrace the change. So what is sort of the right way, if there is one, to embrace the change for people who are not technologists?
So that's a good question, Rahul. I actually had a consulting engagement with a Fortune 500 CXO, and what I gave him was sort of a playbook on how he should be thinking about AI, and I think it generally applies to a lot of managers at different levels. So the quick set of questions that you might think about is, if you are looking to apply AI insights to some current business flows, do you have a clearly defined set of target areas where they would add AI insights could give you higher value than what you already know, right? And do you have alignment with across the executive team on the relative prioritization of those? And then the main question is, assuming all the data were available, assuming all the data is, quite often when you start on these AI endeavors, you realize that you don't really have all the data to give you the insights that you need. But assuming it were available, can you identify a couple of flagship use cases that you can get going with that have clearly quantifiable and direct business impact, right? And what is the bar that your program needs to clear to drive excitement about the potential impact? Which, I mean, these are all questions that seem basic, but if you don't answer them, these kinds of endeavors often fail. And when you look at, if you're looking to get an AI insight for a particular use case, assuming all the data is available and a human expert knows a post priori, so after some event has happened, they know exactly what data could have predicted this event, and they go and look in all the data sets that you actually have. Would they be able to say, yeah, after the event has happened, I could have predicted the event based on the data that exists? That means the question really is there really signal in the data that can be meaningfully extracted, right? And if you don't have all the data, do you have a viable strategy to aggregate internal data and augment it with potentially external data set? Are you willing to do that? Right. So these are all questions that the data scientists cannot answer. It's really questions that executives have to answer. But at the next level, it is, do you have an engagement strategy for stakeholders and end users? So if you're trying to bring AI into some business workflow, do you understand how it's going to be used? Right? Quite a lot of the times, data scientists are dealing in the world of false positives, false negatives, and metrics associated with that, and they'll talk to you about a variety of scores. But really, a system in which the AI is presenting something for a human expert to look at and make some decisions is different than an AI system which is deployed to take some autonomous action, or you're having some automated action. So these are the kinds of soft skills and the framing of questions that we found actually to be very valuable. So we hire in our company, we hire specifically for these kinds of soft skills. We call them engagement managers, who are asking all the analytics-oriented questions, but not necessarily hard data science type. And then, especially when you start getting into the world of things like natural language, it becomes even more interesting, because AI for natural language has done a lot of work in basic things like recognizing a question, being able to answer the question. NLU, natural language understanding, is still the realm of very few companies who have enough natural language to be able to understand that. So these are all important considerations.
Thank you. Just for all the participants, my colleague, Professor Rajan, will shortly post a link where you can collect your certificates of participation for today's program. Rahul, are you going to continue with the questions or shall I go ahead?
Yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. So we have my fellow colleague, Professor Archie D'Souza, who is pretty much an expert in logistics and supply chain. So he asks, how is AI really going to impact logistics and supply chain? Some amount of AI, I suppose, has already come in. For example, container ships and how they are loaded and so on and so forth. Choosing the best routes across the world are all, impacted by artificial intelligence. But what is your point of view, Dr. Gorti? Do you feel that AI is going to impact how we look at logistics and supply chain across the world?
So the answer to that question is yes. I do feel that. The question of how exactly it will do, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. So, the way we interact with many of our industrial companies is really to help them frame how an AI effort will help them address their specific business problem, right? Typically, in any sort of these enterprise workflows, whether it's logistics management or so we talk to, for example, shipping companies, right? And we're talking to them in the context of maintenance of the ships, which is a pretty big set of expenditures for them. Or we talk to financial companies who are looking at fraud detection. Now, we are not experts in what sorts of data you have, most AI companies will typically tend to work with some subject matter expert who understands what sorts of data is collected, what is the business question that you're trying to frame, and then how can AI help solve that problem. In this case, I have no doubt that there are problems that will be solved and can be solved. I just don't know how to frame those problems myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And my colleague, really, from my experience in the shipping industry and what I understand of artificial intelligence, I'm fairly certain and have a gut feeling that AI is going to impact the shipping industry greatly as we go ahead, including the rest of supply chain and logistics. But I have a very interesting question from my colleague, Dr. Padmalata Hegde, who says, what AI applications can do to facilitate recovery and overcome the effects of the pandemic? So can AI really be, fast forwarded in the sense that they bring in benefits in recovery of economies, of human life, and so on, to post the pandemic?
Boy, you guys are throwing some hard questions at me. So yeah, I mean, post pandemic, what actually is going to happen is anybody's guess, right? I think what is clear is that our whole a need for adapting quickly has changed, and our need for formulating what if we do this, what if we do that, and collecting data continuously across a variety of processes. How is coronavirus spreading? Which are the So for example, right now we still don't have enough data collection that's going on that will tell us who is getting sicker, right? Who's getting sicker faster? Who's recovering faster? How is this thing spreading between different people? And there's been a bit of a systemic issue with not enough collaboration across all the countries where this is happening, and I think that's being looked at. I think in a future pandemic we'll have much better coordination of data collection to drive faster response. In terms of contact tracing, in terms of determining how it might potentially spread based on some local outbreak somewhere. These are all the things that I think AI could definitely help, and I think we're definitely starting to see a lot of models developed around.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I have been following self-driving cars and so on a little closely. So I know the challenges that exist even while technology goes ahead, and the interface between humans and technology. And I think we are in a situation where, when we were very young people, we viewed the computer, and many people didn't understand what the computer could do or could not do. And we've viewed it with fascination. And of course, we have learned to live with it. And I suspect that with AI too, that is something that is going to happen. So again, an interesting question, in your experience, and you have gone to some of the most prestigious places in the world, Do you think a robo can replace a professor at any point in time in the near future?
No, I don't. And the reason is because you guys have all heard of the Turing Test, right? Where you're essentially trying to get to see if a robot can essentially capture the very subjective nature of these conversations. The very back and forth that we're having right now requires so much context of all your past experience that you're using to not only frame the right types of questions, but to be able to direct this conversation is not something that I think we've even gotten close to, right? We've done it in very limited context. So, for example, we might be able to do things like answering basic questions that elementary school teachers might have about, kids might have about like math or things like that, arithmetic, stuff like that. But these very nuanced conversations that we're having right now, there is just too much subjectivity, and natural language understanding, I don't believe, has evolved to that point.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And there are some more questions. Okay, I'll go with the last one to humor my friend, Commander Himanshu Joshi. Commander Joshi is a naval aviator. He's now a faculty. He teaches training and development. So he asked a rather strange question. He says, what's the connection between AI and 5G? I don't know whether you want to take that. Maybe spend a couple of minutes.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly there are different things. 5G is fundamentally about network connectivity, and AI is fundamentally about processing data and information. How can 5G accelerate AI development? I think what you're seeing with 5G is much lower latency networks, which means that you can probably have more processing happening in the cloud, where you have the ability to leverage very vast. AI systems are fundamentally very hungry, both in terms of data and in terms of compute power. So many of these AI companies that have done really well have massive compute centers, massive amounts of data that they've collected, and that's how they're able to build these really good models. So when you're talking about 5G, you essentially mean that you could do things, for example, like traffic signal that's connected via 5G to a cloud, and it can basically talk to another traffic signal that's further down the road, and you're taking patterns of data emerging from these two traffic signals to inform a driver about potential bad traffic conditions and so on and so forth. I'm just making up some example, but these are the kinds of things that are enabled. 5G is fundamentally about enabling things to be connected, not just devices that are at the end of where a human is staring at a screen, but also things that can be connected at low latency. And then the mind boggles with what sorts of applications you can build on top of it. Really, it's about the imagination at that point.
Amazing. And thank you very much for taking us through this wonderful 1 hour of, I think, futuristic thought. And I've rarely come across somebody who has such deep insights into technology and what might lie ahead. And the humility to also say that you don't know some things, while obviously being the most educated person in the room.
Well,
along, of course,
I find that as you get older, you get more humble because you discover all the things that you don't know.
Don't know, yeah, of course. I've got my wonderful colleague, Dr. Rahul Dige, who shared space with you at MIT, and I find him the very
That's
same, and it's brilliant. So I want to thank you, Dr. Sreenivasa Gorti, for being here with us at Dayanand Sagar University. I want to thank our participants for participating in large numbers as always. I also want to remind all of you that we have very interesting speakers coming up. On 21st, we have Mr. Vinod Philip from Siemens Energy in Berlin talking about sustainable energy production. And then we have a fantastic speaker, Professor Richard Boyatsis from the Case Western Reserve University talking on effective leadership. And then we've got Mr. Srinivas Iyengar, who's the Vice President at EVRY, a Bangalore-based technology company, who's going to talk on healthcare and the use of AI and so on. And then we've got one more of Dr. Gorti's and Rahul's friend, Dr. Hanwook Lim, who's joining us from Seoul in Korea to talk about logistics and supply chain. So that's what we've got lined up. And thank you so much, and good night and good morning to you, Dr. Gorti. And thank you once again. And when you're in Bangalore next, when you're Bangalore next, do visit us, and please come and meet our students. And I'm sure you'll find them to be a very bright set of guys.
Definitely will do.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day. Have a good evening.
All of you, collect your certificates, please. They're wonderful certificates. Thank you.